Hello and welcome back, dear students, once again to your channel. Today we shall be discussing a poem from your ICSE syllabus. It's called I Remember by Thomas Hood. But before I begin, let me remind you, if you find these videos helpful and interesting, do not forget to give me a like and subscribe to my channel. All right. I remember from your treasure chest, page number 13. About the poet, this section is very important and we are not going to skip it for anything. Thomas Hood was an English poet born in London, and then we come down. I Remember was first published in the year 1844. The poet addresses the gloomy and uncertain adulthood in the light of a perfect childhood, and that makes the narrative universal. The poet feels that time passes by leaving only memories behind. Okay, so let us see what the poet has to say in the poem. I remember. So, I remember the house where I was born, the little window where the sun came peeping in at morn. He never came a wink too soon, nor brought too long a day. But now I often wish the night had borne my breath away. So the poem opens with I remember. This is the figure of speech here is used as repetition. Okay, because remember, the same words are repeated simultaneously. I remember the house where I was born. So the poet remembers very fondly the house where he was born. And he says there was a little window where the sun came peeping in at morn. Morn is morning. So there would be a small window in the house from where the sun rays would fall in. Okay. And the poet would think that it is as if the sun peeping in. The figure of speech here used is a personification. The sun is personified here because only human beings can peep in. But if sun rays are peeping in, that means the sun is personified. He never came a wink too soon, nor brought too long a day. But now I often wish the night had borne my breath away. So the poet says that the sun never came early, nor did it go late. But then he often wishes, now as an adult, that he should have died in the night. Okay, so the poem begins with a high spirited note. The poet is extremely cheerful and optimistic at this point of time. He is in high spirit. This brings out the contrast between the past and the present. In the past, when he was a young child, he was extremely full of life, full of happiness. But now he is wishing as an adult that the night should have taken his breath away. Night again is personified. So we see here the childhood innocence and experience slowly passing into poet's naivety as a child, which is paving way to a sense of hopelessness and anguish. The next stanza goes, I remember, the roses red and white, the violets and the lily cups, those flowers made of light. So now from the poet's house, the scenario or the setting shifts to the poet's garden. And he says he remembers how his garden would be filled with roses, which were either of red color as well as of white color. There would be violets. Violets are also flowers, and the lily cups. And those flowers were extremely bright and shiny, and that is why they were supposed to be made up of light. So, this is a visual imagery. We could visualize the poet's garden. The lilacs where the robin built, and where my brother set the laburnum on his birthday. The tree is living yet. So there was a lilac. There were lilacs also which would grow, where the robin is a small bird, had built its nest, and there in that garden, the poet's brother had planted a tree, laburnum tree. Laburnum is a tall tree, a huge tree, which bears yellow color flowers. Okay. So the brother had planted the tree, and the tree is still surviving. But unfortunately, the brother is not there any longer. So the poet's transition from childhood into adulthood had seen him go through a series of crises and losses. Okay, one of which is the loss of his own dear brother. And so the wisdom and maturity of adulthood is contrasted with the ignorance and innocence of the childhood. All right. The poet goes on to say, I remember where I used to swing and thought the air must rushes fresh to swallows on the wing. So he even remembers there was a swing, okay? And he used to enjoy the swing to its heart's content. My spirits flew in feathers then. Spirits flew in feathers then, figure of speeches. Feathers flew, FF repeated, so figure of speeches, alliteration. Very good. My spirit flew in feathers then, that is so heavy now, and summer pools could hardly cool the fever on my brow. So the poet remembers the swing on he used to enjoy swinging. Okay, and now he says that in his childhood, his spirits were like those of the free spirited bird, which were extremely light as the feathers of a bird. He would enjoy. But now, even when he's in the swimming pool, he could hardly get any relaxation and satisfaction because of the fever on his brow. What is this fever? This fever is a metaphor for the responsibilities that he has as an adult. So, in other words, the poet is constantly highlighting how his days in the past as a child were extremely carefree, how he was extremely innocent, but now as a matured individual, he has got a lot of responsibilities. He has suffered multiple losses, which have made him, dejected and hopeless. I remember the fir trees dark and high. I used to think their slender tops were closed against the sky. So he remembers in his childhood, he used to believe, he was under the impression that the tall, dark fir trees, because they were so tall and dark, they were going up to the sky. This he believed as a child. It was a childish ignorance, but now, as an matured individual, got to realize this. He has understood this, that these trees cannot reach the top. But now it's little joy, but it is not a very happy realization that he's got now. To know I am farther off from heaven than when I was a boy. So his reasoning and intellect does not bring him comfort. It does not give him happiness to learn that he's farther away from heaven. Farther away from heaven means is far removed from God. When you're far removed from God, you are likely to no longer remain innocent. So the poet does not get happiness to realize the fact that he's farther away from heaven. Rather, as a young child, he was extremely happy to believe that these tall, slender fir trees would go up high in the sky. Alright, so now when the poem ends, we see that the mood of the poet has shifted to that of a pensive and melancholic one. When the poet has begun speaking, he had begun by saying of the house where he was born. He was extremely elated and happy. He was in high spirit. But now, to realize the fact as a matured individual that he is far away from heaven, he is in extremely pensive and gloomy mood. So, from high spirited, he's become extremely melancholic. Now, if you notice one more thing, children, that each of the stanzas begin with the same set of words, I remember, I remember. This is a new figure of speech for you. I mean, it's not new. Those of you who have seen my video on this thing on the night me, you will know those that particular section. You remember letters of thanks, letters from banks, letters of joy from the girl and the boy. So letters were repeated constantly. Letters with holiday snaps to enlarging, letters with faces scrawled in the margin. The figure of speech was anaphora. Here also we see the lines, the beginning lines of all the stanzas are the same. I remember, I remember. So the figure of speech here is used is anaphora. We have seen personification being used here, we've seen metaphors being used here, and now anaphora. So our reading of the poem tells us that the poet, coming to the theme, the poet is trying to draw the reader's attention to the uncertain, gloomy adulthood versus the perfect, happy childhood. The kind of problematic adulthood he has with the sort of realizations that he's got as a mature individual and the series of losses he's suffered versus the perfect, happy, carefree, and innocent childhood. That is number one. And number two is the role of memory with the fondness and the nostalgia that is permeated throughout in the poem. Now, coming to the title of the poem, I remember, it goes without saying, it is a repetition. I remember. But what is interesting to note here is the use of the pronoun I. I, the use of the pronoun I here adds a personal autobiographical touch to the poem. It helps us to relate with the predicament, with the problem of the poet on a personal level. Al- Also, the title of the poem is suggestive and extremely appealing. Suggestive, why? Because it essentially brings out how the poet is trying to recall the past, the memories of the past, and appealing because of the nostalgia that it brings in its way. All right. So, this is the poem for you, dear children. If you find this video interesting, do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video very soon. Till then, take very good care of your health and goodbye.